Yeah, it seems that it works. Okay.
It works, yes?
Yeah. Okay, so in this case, I need a link and like 5 minutes or 7 minutes for preparation of the post for Telegram. Yeah, it
wait.
seems that it works.
I've copied link. I will put it in the chat here.
Okay.
Or should you want it? Do you want it via
No,
email?
chat here is okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's in the chat. This is the YouTube live
So
stream.
in this case, I need a link and like 5 minutes.
Hello, Anton.
Hi.
Arseny is already here, but he's preparing a post on Telegram.
Hey, yeah, it's early, so we wait 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
Yes, I told him that 10 minutes after 6 we will start.
All right.
Hello, everybody. We're gonna start 10 minutes after 6. Just let you know. Arseny. And from where are you? Will be speaking from Moscow?
No, from Venice.
From Venice.
Yeah. So we live in between, and more than half a year in Venice. So until spring we are here.
Venice, and then you're going back to Russia.
Yeah. In spring, I guess, depending on situation with COVID and in general.
Привет, Arseny.
Привет, Антон.
Thomas.
Hello.
How is it going?
Good. Finally good. On my side.
Yeah, you feel better? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel all right. Finally. 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Anton, how are you?
Good. Yeah. Actually, going to Moscow on Sunday. Yeah.
Cool.
Moscow and then St. Petersburg. Yeah. And then Prague. Yeah.
Screening or preparations?
Huh?
Preparations?
Yeah. So what do you think? I think there are still a few people missing, so I want to kind of give them a chance to catch the beginning of this. Should we wait another 2-3 minutes?
We can.
Or what do you think, Thomas? You're the boss.
I'm the boss, so I would start.
Okay, let's start.
If I'm the boss, I would start.
Maybe then I'll make a very short introduction. Sure. And then hand it over to Arseny, and then we do our usual Q&A and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So Arseny, first of all, just maybe to clarify what this is, it's not a formal lecture. It's basically a class that's being offered at the Prague Academy of Art. Each year they invite a guest professor, guest artist to run a kind of a open-ended course, and they're free to develop their own curriculum and so forth. And normally it happens physically in person, but because of COVID, we're starting online, but eventually I will go to Prague, and there is a whole kind of very beautiful modernist small building that normally houses this particular course. It's like a large studio and a small apartment. Yeah. And yeah, hopefully we'll continue this in person. But for my program, I wanted to do something comprehensive on Russian cosmism. So it's structured around 8 talks by different people that I've been working with quite closely over the past few years, including yourself. And it's a bit informal. So after the talk, maybe we'll just have a conversation. And you are actually one of the first artists that will be speaking in the series, because we started with Boris Groys, who is a theorist, and then Oksana Timofeyeva, who is also a theorist, and Nikolai Smirnov is an artist, but a very unusual kind of an artist, and also quite theoretic. His practice is maybe more theoretically based than involves production of any object. And for me, it's very exciting to actually have an artist present today, because I think sometimes it becomes a little bit tricky with these classes or these lectures that are given in an art context, yes, but because cosmism is so much a theory, a philosophy, a set of ideas, sometimes it's not entirely clear how to connect these ideas to a specific practice, yeah, which is like the center of it for me. It's not really so much about abstract thinking, but at least my relationship to cosmism is as something that triggers artistic acts, production of certain films, as it is for you in terms of production of installations and sculptures and many, many other things. So this was basically my specific interest to have you speak, and particularly in the early part of this program. So also so that it doesn't get so abstract that the class is kind of just lost, yeah. And Arseny Zhilyaev is an artist from Moscow, well, actually not originally from Moscow, from Voronezh, but who has been living and working in Moscow for quite a long time. He is also a frequent collaborator of mine. We've worked on many projects together, which included all sorts of things, from exhibitions to publications to symposia in different countries. He is also the editor of Avant-Garde Musiology, which is a book that Iflux published a few years ago, which is a remarkable collections of essays on radical and experimental museum practices and curatorial practices and so forth, which you should definitely try to get a hold of. And in that book, there is like a whole chapter on cosmism, and actually the essay that we started to read together on museum, its mission and meaning by Nikolai Fedorov was first published in English in that book of Arseny. So I think maybe this is enough of an introduction, and I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anton, and colleagues for coming and having me here. So I guess I will start with my screen. Just a second. Yeah, and I will start as soon as we are in the context of educational situation. I decided that maybe it will be more interesting to start not precisely with cosmism, but explain why this unusual topic appeared in my life, and explain a little bit the general trajectory of my interest, and maybe this will give broader context and understanding of possible usage of this quite a big thing that packed within this umbrella term. So I'd like to start from the beginning, let's say from the middle of 2000, when I just moved from Voronezh to Moscow and decided to be an artist. And by that time, Moscow didn't have a lot of places, a lot of museums connected with contemporary art. Of course, there was a still active small circle of Moscow conceptualists, and the materials were available online already, and I grew up with them. But speaking about more actual contacts, more live things, Moscow was a provincial city, which is okay. I'm from province, so it's normal. But anyway, it was a problem where to find inspiration for your art. And on the other hand, we had a period of young Putin and high prices of oil, and everything was almost okay for people, and contemporary art, beside of lack of infrastructure, lack of a museum, and critical approaches in general, flourishing with heavy, kitschy, commercial things on the one hand. On the other hand, it was a time of growing interest towards modernism and thinking of modernism and objects, etc., etc. And all of that things were not very close to me. And all of a sudden, I came across of Museum of New Russian History, which was a former Museum of Revolution, and it was a crucial point in my development, I would say, because these museums, and particularly this, because it's like museum network. There were a lot of Museum of Revolutions in former USSR and Eastern Europe, and in Moscow there were, I guess, at least 5, maybe, or even more. And what I found in this museum was quite unusual, and its expositions looked like what I read in books about art history, or read about critical, I don't know, installations and art pieces from 2000. But it was in strong contrast with actual agenda in art in Moscow in 2000s, in the middle of 2000s. So it was shocking. I understand that it sounds a little bit theoretical. I will show you some pictures that will be more understandable. But before, I just like to mention some, let's say, methodological things that was interesting for me, because first of all, those museums were not part of art system, and literally speaking, in simple, they were not part of art, and they were part of life. At the same time, those museums used art a lot, and their exposition, even it was not curatorial or artistic exposition on the contemporary art, they were produced quite close, as I said before, to understanding of a critical installation. So it was a kind of narrative, the installation based on documentaries and the different media. So it was like collage of different media unified in one narration, but as kind of collage. And of course, this narration was about revolution. And even in 2000, even with young Putin, let's say, yeah, it was already kind of tricky topic. Even the word revolution was forbidden by that time, not like now, because now it's much tougher. But it wasn't possible to find such broad information about resistance to censorship, self-organization, problems with, I don't know, police and state violence in state institution. So it was very interesting situation when in the almost heart of the system, ideological system, there was a blind spot. Of course, museums were not popular at that time, and now I guess as well. I mean, museums of former museums of revolution, perhaps internet and video and TV are the main channels of propaganda now. But anyway, museums give us material evidence of different stories, you know. So we must have place where something material, something solid exists, and this can be used as kind of supporting things to general, more abstract, more virtual construction. And in the basement, as I said, of all of the whole this construction was a revolution. I don't know why this happened. Perhaps museums were not popular, and there were many other things to do in 90s and 2000 in Russia, and they were just on margins. But on the other hand, as I said, this was a fantastic opportunity. Unfortunately, I do not have today pictures from Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow, but just to mention this, in 2000, its exposition was transformed into more kitschy and absolutely uninteresting thing. But before that, it was built by Kolychuk, who was a super important Russian kinetist, like kinetic artist, like part of proto-conceptual movement. And he did like beautiful artistic installation, and it looks absolutely fantastic as masterpiece. And in 90s, it was available even in early 2000s. But then with growing interest of the state in ideology, unfortunately, we started to lose those museums and lose exhibitions from them. So I just would like to show you maybe several pictures randomly collected today for this lecture. So one, what we have in here, it is in Kyrgyzstan. It is a museum in on a mount that has some relation to Soviet modernism, and we may see how beautiful it is and how it could be. So it has this futuristic hope, I would say, towards the futures. Many Soviet architectural projects from 70s, 80s had. Or there is another example, weird, Anton knows that, and even perhaps did something there. It is a church in Ukraine that was turned into a museum of space exploration. Very unusual connection, but very logical for Russian cosmism. And there are some other example in Russia, maybe less straight, less striking, but anyway, these topics exist together. And some pictures from former museums of revolution. This is Krasnaya Presnya. I will tell you a little bit more later on this museum, because I did a project there. So this is 80s. And we may trace some links to suprematistic design and photo montage, photo collage of 1920s. Even though, of course, I understood clearly that the image of revolution that was depicted in 80s and exists until 2000 in those museums, of course, it was already kind of monument. It was not actually, you know, open for interpretation, etc., etc. But even in such type of condition, it was stronger and more radical than many other, let's say, more artistic installations of that time in Russia. And I thought that maybe it's very interesting to work with this topic methodologically and conceptually. So conceptually, I thought that perhaps what we may find in non-artistic Soviet museums has some connection to historical avant-garde, because we are dealing not with art territory, but with particularly organized projects. And in my imagination, it was quite close to what we had in case of post-revolutionary avant-garde and productivist movement, in case of Arvatov and Rodchenko and other people who decided to give up art and start to produce life. And museums didn't have this obligation. They were not part of art system by that time, and they did something opposite. So they moved not from art to life, but from life to art. And it was interesting, but at the beginning it was just intuition. So I did not understand whether it's true or not. Maybe it's just a coincidence. And I started my research, Anton mentioned it, on avant-garde museology, and my interest to cosmism appeared through this more broader context of the museum. And now I will show you shortly some project from this early period, in order to give you just a general understanding how it's possible to work with the frame of museum in general, with the museum of possible revolution, past revolution, of forthcoming revolution, and then like final step of the story, final step of my research in museology was cosmism, because it was conceptually and practically not historically, because historically cosmism had appeared earlier, things that Soviet museologists did. But anyway, conceptually and methodologically, it was next step, next level. So in order to prepare this level, I need to shortly explain what I did. Yeah, and there is one more picture from Krasnaya Presnya. This is 80s. So you might see like modernistic things all together with historical installation, with photos, etc. And in 2009, I did a project. It was early project. I not very often show pictures from it. It was called New Museum of Revolution. It was in my native city, Voronezh, and the idea was to play with the idea of forthcoming revolution and play with this time distance, that you are, as a spectator, come to museum in the future, and this museum already speaks about revolution in the past, but it's different from what we have right now. So it's kind of forthcoming revolution, and it was dedicated to some radical ecologists and anarchists from 20th century. So it was like first step, but visually and in terms of materials, it was different. But I would say that methodologically, conceptually, it was already quite close, because we have the situation in the future that speaks about its past, and its past kind of close to what we are having with our current situation. And then return to this museum of Krasnaya Presnya in Moscow, together with my colleague Ilya Budrayskis. We decided to do a project, Pedagogical Poem. Its title was taken from a novel by Soviet educator Makarenko, and the idea was to produce art project shaped as educational program, but within museum, and try to revitalize this, as I said already, bronze monument of revolution, try to revitalize this image and speak openly about its past and possible future. And we had started this project in, I guess, 2010, and then was big political clash that happened in 2011. So it was interesting how this museological context, I would say, coincide with the general situation in Moscow, because it was the biggest protest in, I guess, post-Soviet period, and museum was quite close, even in terms of its location, to heart of the protest. But a general idea was almost the same. Try to I would say final idea was close to this more futurological view, because director of the museum, like in the months before the final exposition, that considered as a kind of final, gathering of all things together. this person said that we cannot do what we wanted because political situation has changed, and he understood that we are part of I don't know, foreign forces that try to infiltrate into Russian museological system with a very bad goal, speaking about revolution. So it was a paradoxical situation that he accused us in discussing revolution in the former Museum of Revolution, where you might find how to produce bomb, for instance. So it was strange, and we decided that maybe we need to speak about another possible forthcoming museum and slightly change our title towards Pedagogical Poem, Archive of Future Museum of History. So we try to imagine another museum of history that will be more open and will have opportunities to work with important things. So here we have some photos from museological archive. Those are heroes of the first Russian Revolution from 1905. They were excluded from the exposition as not important, but it was really striking material, and our idea was to return it back, and we actually tried to do this. So some pictures from what we had. It was absolutely out of time. I mean, this project, it was beginning of 2010s, and I guess educational projects were already out of fashion. But for Russia and for political situation, we were quite sure that it's important to have things like that and learn how to work all together and speak about possible political changes. And it was nice to do this in the context of museum. Some pictures that I found later in archives, and we publish it in Avant-Garde Musiology. So here, this is Leningrad Museum of Revolution, and we have exhibit the People's Will Organization, Народная Воля, dynamite workshop. So you can imagine radicality of such people, that they just do such type of installations or workshops. Another interesting case, this is mobile laboratory 1. That was a mobile exhibition dedicated to agriculture. Mainly things like that appeared in Ukraine, and this mobile trucks worked in remote villages, working with peasants, explaining through exhibitions, through different media, how to, I don't know, produce plants better and how to work together in common socialistic construction. So just to give you some insights into the topic, because as I said, initially it was just intuition that those museums could be considered as kind of echo of historical avant-garde, but then I understood that it's true, at least partly. Maybe it was a forbidden part of historical avant-garde. Because it was already not art anymore, but at the same time, for Soviet museology, it was too radical, so it was even not part of museology, so it was absolutely out of the context. But we may find a lot of things that close to radical, especially political art in 20th century. Art of Nomad Woman, 1930s. And the second picture is from Liberation of Azerbaijan Women. So another important topic, feminism and museums. Leningradsky Musée Atheism, Leningrad's Museum of Atheism. And you may see here again, design resembles us suprematistic paintings by Malevich and his followers, but that are used for general scientific narration, explaining explaining scientific facts about our universe and explaining ideological sense of the religion. And another example from Leningrad. With a quote from Marx. And just shortly, next step was my interest to artistic museums, and in particular things that did Alexei Fedorov-Davidov, who was a curator associated with a sociological school, with people who try to contextualize art within more broader sociological context. And he did complex Marxist exhibitions, trying to rewrite the history of art through the lens of class war and through the lens of a new situation where art already something different from what we have right now, for instance, under capitalistic relations. So it was an attempt to demolish the borderline between art and life and speak already from this new reality where art just traces of class war. And there are two pictures from his projects from his experimental complex Marxist exposition. And just to mention some interesting methodological things from here, he started to use a lot of texts, and some of them were quotes from political activists or from writers or from theoreticians, some of them related to one or another particular historical situation. And he started to exhibit art of oppressed classes, like workers or peasants, and started to include advertisement and other things that were not considered as part of cultural production by that time. So it was super innovative, even though such type of radical class approach is too hot for now. But of course, we are living in a situation where post-colonial and decolonial theories influenced contemporary art context, and we're now dealing with almost the same issues, but in other context, I would say. And some projects that reacted to those approaches. So I try to methodologically appropriate the idea of a museum of history and the museum of art after art, let's say, and did, for instance, two projects: Museum of Russian History, Museum Истории России, Mir, New Past Force Objects, and Polite Guest from the Future. This is a picture from New York, where Boris Groys curated exhibition Spectres of Communism. This is part of the installation at the Flux, and the exhibition space, the exhibition hall dedicated to art history of Russia in the future in a more speculative way, where our president became a main hero not only for ordinary people but for art lovers, and became the main artist in this world. And it was a speculative story and speculative frame that recontextualize some of his actions within art context through theory, or through just using this as kind of frame that institutionally transform everything into art. So there is his painting. He did one painting, pattern on frozen window, and there's another, his drawing, digital drawing, and some performance acts. And another part of this project was in California, in San Francisco at Kyrgyzstan, and one chapter of this museum already dedicated to cosmism, or sort of cosmism, and it was about different types of forthcoming religions. And I found one religion actually existing sect of meteorite from Omsk, and try to speculate about it as a possible more modernistic, more secular version of religion. And of course, it's not easy to speak about cosmism and Russian cosmism and without speaking about Russian and Soviet imperialistic ambitions. And it was a play with the idea of Russian Cosmic Federation that will appear in the future, and will expand it into the universe. So we have special camouflage of space forces. Actually, I had done this before. Special forces for cosmos appeared in US and Russia, but unfortunately right now it is our reality. It's not speculation anymore. I just stop here with more historical things and show you some projects from more cosmic chapter of my development, let's say. Yeah, as I mentioned, cosmism was the last part in the development of this radicality, and for me it was interesting that cosmism speaks about situation that what wasn't possible to imagine even from communistic society. You know, in famous Arvatov's book, and Arvatov was the main theoretician of productivist movement. Sorry, there is noise, I guess, from Samsung Galaxy S70. Colleagues, hope can just switch off microphone. Thank you. So, and Arvatov wrote that even in advanced communist society, we will have traditional media of art like paintings and sculpture, because after resolving all social contradictions, mainly based on class war and other types of problems connected with capitalism, anyway, we will exist as humans with their bodies, and this means that we will get all our affects from our past, mainly related to death and love, because as soon as even communists will have bodies, this means that they will die, and they will try to have sex and fall in love, because it's the only way how to physically solve this problem of death. And where is this moment Kosmism starts? Because Kosmism speaks about situation after death, after reaching the point when where we would have technologies that will solve this issue, and there is no death anymore. And after sex, I would say, because in Kosmism, love and sex is something special. So it's not anymore about just physical connection that you use for just imaginary or not imaginary solving the problem of death, but it's something more sublime. It's like language for communication with, I don't know, with eternity or with other species. So it's not anymore about just only our bodies and emotions of our bodies. And it's quite interesting that in the very heart of Cosmist program was a museum, Universal Museum, and I guess that there is no need to speak a lot on general things about Kosmism and Fedorov, but just to mention this topic about importance of museum, because for Fedorov, museum was an institution that resists progress. At the same time, it could work as a kind of laboratory, as a generator of the possible future. And of course, for him, museums that existed in late 19th century, early 20th century was not enough. And he speculated about possible connecting of different institutions under this umbrella idea frame of museum. First of all, museum should be connected with laboratory, like scientific laboratory, with a school, with a church, because church has intuition of immortal being, but does not have hands, and with observatory, which is quite important for scientific researches about cosmos and outer space. So it was very radical vision of the museum, and we may say maybe that we step forward towards this vision. Of course, not fully, but at some extent, we may think we may say that, of course, his vision is closer to what we have now, to what we had in 20th century, and. And for me, it was like next level, I would say, next level in terms of possible speculation and possible narratives. And I decided to check how it works. This idea of this Universal Museum, and try to check different scenarios. For instance, here we have a project, Tsiolkovsky's Second Advent, about one of the father of Soviet space program, possibly, I wouldn't say follower or student, but at least person who met with Fedorov in library and perhaps picked up from him interest to outer space, despite that Tsiolkovsky said that he was absolutely autodidact and he did not had any influence outside of his mind. But anyway, the story was that Tsiolkovsky resurrected in a very particular situation in the museum dedicated to his person and to his ideas, and it was kind of dystopian situation where this resurrection appeared not within, I don't know, communistic society. It's interesting that Fedorov was not communist. He was a kind of conservative person, but he was definitely against capitalism and any possible usage of intuition related to cosmism for any business purposes, I would say. And this is quite different from what we have now with cosmism and with general interest to life extension and space exploration. And of course, appearance of Tsiolkovsky in such context was very brutal. But what I did, it was something, you know, like a museum apartment we have here in Russia, apartments, and in, of course, in the rest of the world, apartments dedicated to different important persons. And here we have, for instance, cabinet of Tsiolkovsky with his drawings, or kind of copies with small changes, and body for resurrection, Yuri 1. It was, according to legend, one of the first body used for this purpose. And I tried to implement the idea of another cosmist, Gorsky, who speculated about transformation of body in the future. That would be actually like one organ related to our eye, because eye is the most sensible towards light, and on the other hand, eye, according to him, was too passive, so maybe eye should connect it somehow with our genitals and produce bodies that would be at the same time like one erogen zone, if I write using this word in English, but without genitals and without any other organs. So it was very weird speculation. I tried to approach real scientists with this idea, and they said, "You are mad. It's not possible to realize." And I decided to do it in a more speculative way. So just shortly, some other projects. One we did together with Anton in Berlin in the context of exhibition Art Without Death. And here we have library. And in Moscow, there is one very important spot for cosmists, library, Fedorov Library, run by Anastasia Gacheva. And I met with her at the beginning of my research on cosmism, and she's very enthusiastic, very unusual person, and she and her mother in charge of reappearance of cosmism in Russian and Soviet intellectual context, and I decided to do some sort of homage to this library, but as a spaceship shaped as a star with different thinkers, with a god, because it's a Russian secular version, not secular version of cosmism, and books on topic, and even some Chizhevsky chandelier, but not working. Chizhevsky chandelier is special mechanism that produce electricity impulses that change sign of ions. I guess Anton already spoke a little bit on this topic, or will be, because it was part of his movie. And just shortly, another project from Moscow. This is Return project about artificial intelligence that try to reconstruct its path through the length of ancient museum, I would say, with the heroes of different mechanisms that were destroyed in the space race, and part of those mechanisms were real, part were imaginary, and part just was taken by mistake. And the exposition was made by neural networks, and we permanently change it, not permanently, but several times. And virtual version, you might find virtual version of this project you might find on the website Institute of the Cosmos without this installation, but you may download 3D model and printed it. And meanwhile, I just recently I forgot to write to colleagues, but I got mail from one girl who decided to print it and even actually realizes and print some copies, and they look really nice. She decided to use it for her project. So maybe later, Anton, I will send you some pictures. Really nice. So I guess I have almost 5 minutes. I just shortly again mentioned the last project that I had in Moscow called the Monotony of Pattern Recognizer. And this project dedicated to time and possible solutions towards invention of life without time, I would say. And this was maybe the most cold, detached, and abstract project in my case. And the idea was that there was a spaceship, cargo spaceship that lost in space, and in order to get its path towards home, it decided to reinvent art history, because as you perhaps know, art is one, I mean, not optical art, but especially contemporary and conceptual art is one of the most difficult task for automation, because you may automize optical things, but it's quite difficult to automize ideas. I guess it's possible, but it's big challenge, and it's interesting to speculate about that, because in this field, I guess we may say that we are, of course, using the same artificial elements and algorithms as other systems in our world. So the idea was that this spaceship reconstructed art history, but through the very simple things. It found a book by Theodor Adorno on philosophy of new music, and in Russian translation it has this palindrome, old Roman palindrome, Satira Repeten et Opera Rotus, and through using of this palindrome, it starts to elaborate art history. And the idea that such type of poetry, such type of art, which is absolutely symmetrical, almost symmetrical in time, has the same intuition of immortality, because because there is no differentiation between past and future, and if that is true, there is no time. So the idea was to base the whole exhibition on this idea on the one hand. On the other hand, try to work with some other layers important for me and important for implementation of this project. For instance, how we may deal with the idea of labor in this context, whether it needs energy, I don't know, payment, and how to work with such type of situation when machine produces art as an artist. So there was another line dedicated to one of the first art strike from early 1980s, organized by Goran Đorđević, former Yugoslavian artist. And there was a line dedicated to my personal history, and the final stage of the project was two empty exhibition halls with workers of Institute for Mastering of Time, who did sort of training or research on perception of time in relation to previous experience of the visitors. So it was kind of reconstruction and reconnection of different elements of our memories in the current moment. So very shortly, but maybe I may speak more on some issues through Q&A session. So thank you for listening.
Arseny, thank you very much for your talk.
Okay,
May I open Q&A part?
Yeah.
Can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yeah.
Is there any questions to Arseny?
Can I ask two?
Sure, sure. Go on.
When you're shown this museum of space exploration in Ukraine, I thought about whole genre of museum of atheism, which existed in Soviet Union, and like that's the shows made in former churches, represented scientific like experiments and some propaganda materials and space exploration installation and so on. I wanted to ask you if you agree that the every of museum of atheism was kind of museum of popularization of cosmism ideas. And second
really
question,
brave link. Maybe could you explain a little bit more on it? So because it was in the former churches and through propaganda of scientific knowledge, it was rethinking of religion. You mean in this aspect, yeah?
Yeah. That like the genre of museum atheism was like museums made only in churches, and like they had some science experiments exposition which shown that like, planet is round, that there are no God, and etc. But also it were some products of propaganda about space exploration is our first goal, and we have to go to the space, and Gagarin pictures instead of big Jesus, and like all these things. So like I kind of got into the point that maybe museums of atheism, including the one like you shown, it's kind of can be called like museums of cosmism or museums of popularization of cosmism ideas.
And second question, or I may start with this one.
Yeah, and the second one, it's not connected to cosmism, but connected to museum medium. And so it's up to you. I don't know if I can ask this one. It was like opening of Museum of Holocaust in Kiev in this year, and it was pretty controversial. So I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think? Like, if you like it, like it was art directed by Khrizhanovsky, and it was Maria Abramovich installation in it, and as a person who's studying like museums as a medium, what do you think about this one?
Okay, thank you. Well, regarding the first question, I guess it's really really brave and interesting. I guess it's possible to think about museums of atheism in this way, but of course, historically they were not considered like that. But in my opinion, what was interesting in relation to this topic, that at least at the beginning, Soviet Union decided not to fully destroy the churches. Of course, there were some, excesses, some problems, because atheist movement was super huge. I guess it consisted like several millions of people, like active members. So it was really, really, unusual and even not possible to imagine now. And they were super aggressive. And of course, some, churches and even museums were destroyed. But in general, idea was that we need to preserve somehow churches, but find a way how to exhibit churches as a kind of part of general development of culture, general development of art within society. And it was interesting how people implement this. So I read some researchers from that period on critical history of icons. That icons were some type of icons, appearance of some type of icons supported by very controversial people with very controversial ideas, etc., etc. So it was corrupted at the beginning, and finally you find this icon in the church, and there is nothing. But even an attempt to contextualize its appearance already has a lot of critical things. And the second thing was attempt to find a way how to be as strong as possible as a museum, so to be compare with a strong affect that believer could have within the church. And I guess it's interesting task how to to work with this challenge, because church is super strong in terms of installation. And there is a text that we published by Florensky on synthesis of art, with his idea that we cannot actually make musification of church without losing something, because church, it's not only icons, it's architecture, it's smells that we feel when we are inside, it's a particular type of choreography, so it's particular type of singing, so it's like Gesamtkunstwerk. And it was big challenge how to work with this Gesamtkunstwerk somehow. And I guess in case of Kosmism, its vision of museum, I guess, stronger or comparable with this, difficult challenge. But in case of Fyodorov, of course, he was a believer. However, his vision of Orthodox belief was absolutely impossible in his world, in our current world, and even his circle of Russian religious thinkers appeared as big critics of clericality, of big critics of current situation with the church. So what they proposed for now, if someone would say something like Fyodorov, this person could be accused in violation of law against religion. and immediately put into jail. So it was very brave for his time, but he was a believer. So I guess your interpretation needs one edition. So you need somehow to connect this secular part, critical part, and religious part. So maybe if we may imagine museum that would work with cosmism and with theology of liberation, for instance, that would be possible. I remember that Boris Groys once mentioned that he saw something like that in South America. So maybe it would be interesting project. As for the Museum of Holocaust and Khrzhanovsky, I have not seen this, and I don't know, I guess it's even up to date. It's not easy for Russian people of my age to go to Ukraine. So I even do not want to try. And but personally, I don't like what Khrzhanovsky does at all. And it's like, let's say, methodologically, conceptually, ethically, for me, it's something not possible. I guess it's like, you know, fashion magazine with, but from intellectual culture. So it's really, at least, maybe in intention, something interesting, but how he does these things, well, I don't know. I guess it's maybe it works even for propaganda, but not for art. I don't know. Maybe someone, Anton, have you seen this museum?
I haven't seen it, but I've been reading, I've been following press because it's been receiving an enormous amount of press, and it's not art press. It's primarily like really serious publications like Deutsche Welle, which is like the main German government-funded sort of newspaper and a web channel and things like that. And it's very, very interesting what is happening around this project. And yeah, I totally agree with you. It's completely irritating, and it's quite perverse in a way what he is doing with the history of Baba Yar, Holocaust and all of that. At the same time, if you think that one of the biggest dangers at this point in time is the fact that most people are forgetting what happened, yeah, and the history of World War II, the history of Holocaust is receding into the past so rapidly, then in a way you could make an argument that by making it visible, by making it fashionable, which is really so absurd, yeah, you're actually offering something very, very important because you keep it in circulation, yeah, and people need to discuss it, and they continue to have awareness of it. They continue it's continued to be something that is being remembered, yeah. Whereas, you know, with many other Holocaust memorials and things like that, the greatest danger is some kind of complete obsolescence, where something so tragic and such a great warning for the future is basically kind of disappearing with the disappearance of the generations that experienced it firsthand, you know? So I think it's really quite complicated. What worries me a little bit is that what's behind it is a bunch of oligarchs, yeah? And a lot of them have very, very complicated reputations. And actually somebody that works with Iflux quite a bit is also involved with that project as an editor. Primarily for money, he helps them publish things and edit text and things like that. And we've had many conversations with him about the danger of being involved in a project that at any point something really ugly can happen, yeah? Because the particular constellation of people that are funding it, that are basically the key trustees,
are extremely complex people with very complicated past, you know. So it's a really strange phenomenon. I am curious to go and see it. I'm older than you, so I can go to Ukraine very
you have
easily.
another passport.
Yes, they don't expect me. Yeah. So, and I probably will go in the next year or so. I would love to go to Kiev again.
But I may mention here another like mirrored image of the same problem. We discussed this with Nikolai Smirnov in the context of, you know, post-critical future art, because what we're having here in Russia is almost the same, but in even more crazy way, because right now we are having this heritage of World War II as a kind of new religion.
Yeah.
And it has some even, you know, connection conceptually to cosmism. For instance, we have this idea of immortal
soldier, yes.
Immortal soldier, yeah, when millions of people held in photos of their grandmothers and fathers that during Second World War as a kind of parade. But this idea started as a small self-organized event in the Russian province, but right now it's one of the like main propaganda event in our life, and any violation of memory or even image of celebration of USSR as a great winner of this war could be big problem for people.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Plus, speaking about architecture and museums, we have some new projects, some new museums that looks absolutely crazy, like from you know,
you mean that star-shaped
star-shaped museum, new churches. So in terms of impressions, they are really strong. You know, I wouldn't say they are fashionable in Western in Western terms, but it's something really impressive, and it's something absolutely out of contemporary, not even art, but contemporary situation. You know, modern times. So it's something like pre-modern, I would say, and maybe it's a kind of new starting things for a new epoch. Which is I don't know how to react to.
Yeah, but maybe just to answer very directly your question about Zhanovsky, I think it seems very irritating, but it may be okay what he's doing, provided that nothing really ugly turns up in the next few years, yeah, which it could at any point, yeah, like affiliations with, I don't know, mafia or something really horrific, yeah. But you know, it's okay that he brings Marina Abramovich there. First of all, she's Jewish, yeah. She probably lost many of her relatives in World War II in the Balkans because they were also occupied by Germany. And I'm sure that she probably has very sincere feelings towards that particular history. And at the same time, she is somebody who is so concerned with her image and with visibility and with certain constant promotion of her artistic persona. But, you know, these two things, they don't have to cancel each other out in a way somehow, yes, I think. And maybe from Fedorov's point of view, you know, for him, memory is such a essential thing. Without memory, you cannot have a process of resurrection, because if you don't remember the previous generations, you have nothing to work with, yeah? So as a memorial and an attempt to extend the memory, I think Fedorov would probably say, yeah, it's sort of okay what he's doing, although he would be very irritated by the people involved and the amount of money involved and how chic the whole thing is. And yeah, but I think the center of it would not be totally antithetical to Fedorov's approach to certain kinds of, yeah, cultural memory. Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe.
he's a big supporter of radical democracy in all sense of this word, and I guess this, you know, democratic openness even to such type of projects as part of the agenda. So
Yeah, but I think I would like to go and see it and see what's happening there in person, because yeah, it's hard to speak about it merely through newspaper articles and this kind of things.
Okay.
More questions? There must be more questions. First of all, everybody was supposed to prepare 1 or 2 questions based on the text that was distributed.
Can I ask a question about an early work you mentioned? The early work you discussed, the pedagogical poem, and could you describe it formally? How did the pedagogical poem work, please?
Well, the mechanism was that we did the educational program involving many historians who worked with revolution, because my collaborator Ilya Budraskis, he's a good historian himself and political activist. So we invited a lot of people from different angles that's important for the topic of revolution and social changes. Plus, we try to work with the general frame of museum and Museum of Revolution, because it has very interesting and particular machinery. For instance, they have official archives, they have not official archives, they have things that people just keep in their shelves, etc., etc. So we wanted to see how it works in complex, but through discussions. And the final part of the project was kind of producing additional things for general exposition, like using this excluded materials related to history of Russian revolution, because real heroes of that time were substituted by just symbols, let's say, yeah. And part of the information were cut because of censorship, because of repression, etc. So it was a very important and fragile materials. But not only, as I mentioned, this project coincided with political rise movement at the beginning of 2010s, and we tried to collect materials from the streets, like political propaganda papers, newspapers related to these events, even objects. So this was the idea, and try to, on the one hand, show how museological unconsciousness work, as I explained it, because we try to show all this hidden archives, etc. And on the other hand, try to show how this model of the museum could be useful for discussing actual problems and actual situation in Russia. So that was short explanation. But if you'd like, I have this book available in English PDF, so I may share it. And for everybody, if someone wants to get in the context, I may share all my publications on museology and cosmism.
Sure, that would be great.
Okay.
Other questions from students or audience?
Maybe me, but I'm not sure if it's the questions or some comments, because I will freely continue on the Daira question, because I still thinking about the differences between the museum and the church, because my background is from architecture, and I see both of these buildings, some kind of the like a structure and spatial narratives, and also some kind of the ritual and narratives inside during some kind of the visiting or something like this. And the Kosmisa is for me also some kind of the like a religion, or like a very speculative religion, but how I understand the Kosmisa during my reading the text and something like this. And maybe my question is, what kind of the differences you see between the buildings like a museum and the church? Because I see some kind of the very significant points together. Maybe it's not like a super question, but now I have to thinking still about some kind of the like ritual narrative in both of these buildings, and some kind of the how to show some maybe art pieces or something, or everything in this kind of the narrative, in the spatial narratives.
Well, I guess the topic has a long history, interconnection of church and the museum. But usually in the 20th century, what we had is a criticism towards this closeness. From my point of view, as we already discussed, these atheistic museums, I guess it's interesting, another angle, I would say, when you're not just saying, okay, it's like something that you must completely vanish from our quite clear, empty, super, ultra rational white cube, but maybe something opposite. Maybe it's interesting to not to completely destroy this root, because we anyway having it like in our social organization, in our psychic organization, in our unconsciousness, and try to work with this somehow. And I guess speaking about architecture, as I mentioned, late Soviet modernism in general had a lot of links towards this idea of space exploration, because it was born after 60s with this bright vision of possible future. And all those buildings, in my opinion, resemble a little bit churches as well, and museums too, I agree. But on the other hand, what we have in Europe, for instance, we have a big layer of churches from 70s, 60s and 80s. They are beautiful, they're quite modernistic, from big names of even avant-garde, like Corbusier. I saw his church in France. It was like super beautiful. And I guess, I guess it's not only about architecture, but in general, Kosmism gives another vision of possible interconnection of different fields that is usually separated, but could be recontextualized, reassembled in a new vision. And I feel it's very resonating with what we are having in current situation with the contemporary art, and current situation with even new theologies, because there are a lot of new versions of theology and new versions of religions. And so I'm not big specialist in this field of theology, but I guess we might think about Orthodox Church as possibly one of the version of and the art of Orthodox Church as one of the possible foundation for post-colonial criticism towards Russia. So, but it's quite difficult because Russia is a colonial state, and it's very tricky to work with this topic. But it has a lot of things to work, and Kosmism could be worth to play with in this field as well. So I'm not sure that I answer properly, but just some.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much, because also my question wasn't like a very super clear question, but I really want to maybe some kind of the reflection about what I'm thinking after the Daria asking and your presentation. But thank you so much.
Thank you for question and interest.
Any questions? Because we are at the end of our 1.5 hour long session.
If possible, just probably a short comment of the last topic, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So thank you. Hi, everybody. So I was interested in the last point about the church, connection between the church and museum. So, and I have some reaction, some feeling that probably the church, it's a place of sacralization, was built up for the place of sacralization, and was taken about the spirits mainly. But also that's like in a, let's say, probably in Bible, saying that some time for to take out the stones and special time to collect the stones. And probably the church, it's a type of place for collect the stones, but not stones like a physical matter, but stones like some physical projection of some movement of spirit and movement of soul. So in this case, probably the church, like architecture point, will be interesting point of empty space, which is a may have not only introverted activity for souls of people or something like that, but place for sacralization of ordinary reality, let's say. So some empty space of typhoon, which is keep some quietness and emptiness, and but have special activity outside when ordinary things looks like projection of spiritual power of people or and space, I don't know. In this case, it makes some similarity to the role of museum in a possible future, which is jumping out from the discussion, what is museum? It's just an entertainment place, or it's a very frozen place for to, let's say, to keep the tradition, something like that. It's very jump out from this very polarity of question of is it tradition or it's for the future or from the past. But it's more neutral place, which is made built up like architecture, like a ship, which is have some function, but this not only function, they have some existential quality. That's what my short, probably, I'm sorry about my English, and I'm sorry that I took part of the discussion half an hour later. So I'm little bit, probably a little bit out of context in this case, so sorry.
Thank you. I guess I may answer with the idea of soborность that was quite important for Fyodorov, and he speculated about the idea of church as a kind of sabor, like a temple of people, not of a museum of temple of people, not of objects. And Anton did a beautiful movie on the topic, so I highly recommend you to watch this. On the museum within Russian Kosmism that plays with this idea of community, idea of museum as a kind of gathering of people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just as a way to wrap up this discussion, maybe just to also get back to what Carolina was asking about. You know, of course, the two things are so closely related. You know, first of all, I think we also need to think maybe a little bit about the church and the museum slightly differently, not what they seem to be doing, but what actually happens there, what they're actually doing, you know. And churches and museums, since the very beginning of urban organized societies, going back 6,000 years ago, completely financially, economically controlled the local economy. This was the place for distribution of food, for redistribution of all of the assets, valuables, possessions. It was the center of political power. It was where all of the knowledge was held, where not only religious items or aspects of ritual, but basically all of the advanced and most significant aspects of these particular societies were largely controlled, distributed, shared, disseminated through the temple. Yeah. So I don't know if there is an institution that was more shaping in terms of organizing life, shaping subjects of the societies, you know. And of course, you can't really, you know, contemporary churches are not the temples of Mesopotamia. Yeah, but it is like, there is a trajectory. It's all connected historically. It's a continuation of a very particular process. And there is this idea of dissemination. Like, for example, Russian Orthodox churches are all based on Hagia Sophia in a certain way. Yeah, as Orthodox Christianity was disseminated through Russia when it baptized. But of course, Hagia Sophia has a very particular history, you know, and it was exactly a temple in the sense of the ancient temples, something constructed very deliberately, not just for a place for a religious ritual or some kind of spiritual life, but as a political project, as an economic project, as a project of education and all sorts of things, you know. So when this kind of key social structure gets kind of like syndicated, yeah, through hundreds and thousands of local churches over a vast geographical area, it's a kind of a very complex thing. And I think something quite similar happens with museums in a sense, or particularly happened in the Soviet Union, because there was such a effort at a certain point to create an enormous amount of museums after the revolution. Museums in places where they have never existed, you know, museums of history, museums of revolution, museums of atheism, museums of art, any kind of museum, yeah. And there is something very interesting that I came across once in reading about Ataturk, yeah, the head of modern Turkey, in a certain sense, creator of modern Turkey, yeah, that he kind of wrote that to create a nation state, what you need is newspapers, museums, and I forget what the third thing was. There was a third thing, yeah, centralized government or telegraph or something like that, yeah. But it seems like museum is that part of that which produces the state as well, yeah. As does the temple, as does the church, yeah. So and so maybe like the key aspect is like this kind of function of producing subjects more than what seems to be a really theatrical process of, you know, spiritual rituals and singing and beautiful smells, or maybe not so beautiful, and all of that, but there is a kind of engineering that occurs that is incredibly effective, incredibly productive, and has been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's like a machine, you know. Yeah, so that's, I just wanted to throw this in because I think it's more complex. It's a little bit like we're talking about this a little bit on the surface level, but there is of course so much more, you know, and how art plays, what role art plays in both of these institutions is also incredibly interesting, and what art aspires to in and of itself as an institution in itself, yeah, as a sort of a technology of certain kind of transformation. Yeah. So yes, here's my monologue. Should we stop now?
It was brilliant, but yeah, you only add some kind of some kind of new addition to my thinking. That's brilliant. Thank you.
May I shortly comment your monologue?
Yeah, it's very nice to see you, Anton. You know, last time I
Thank
saw
you.
you was in 1989 or
It's
yes,
fantastic.
1989. You haven't changed.
So
Anton is an artist from Moscow as well, and actually,
Great to introduce him.
Thank you for the possibility. So your monologue remind me one things which is I found important to mention. I'll try to be very short. That about some type of architecture, new type of architecture, which is built like a starter in an engine. For example, the system of value. It's a part of construction, part of architecture, which is have possibility or don't have possibility to exist. Creation process, ideas, and it's very delicate and special type of architecture, which is a produce happenings, because it's a question. And also for society, it's not a point, for example, two collector of art. It's two persons, for example, each of them are collecting the art. It's not a point even to discussion. It's not a point to collaboration. The point of collaboration is system of value. It becomes to be ethical construction, becomes to be part of construction of lifestyle. It's not only style, about the possible action, about the quality of peace inside. It's a part of the social construction. So, and because of that, I think the ethical question, it's a part of the construction of art as well. Something like an iceberg, something very deep in the deep inside the water. But this waterboard, which is a divide imitation and real movement of spirit and real movement of action. So what the base, what the motivation, and probably this part of construction also very strong, and gives the basement for even for artworks and art activities. Sorry, that.
Thank you, Anton. There is also somebody just wrote a question for Arseny from Laura F. Thomas, do you want to read it? Maybe just one last one from Laura, and then it's in the chat.
I know. I see it from Laura.
Yes.
Laura.
Because it's about montage and museum display, and maybe that's actually interesting for Arseny too.
I really like to know how some of your thoughts about montage and maybe about your approach putting things, objects, installations into really exciting dialogue. Do you think, is it present in classic museums, or is it the thing what makes difference in artistic curating the museum? I hope that I'm clear. I'm not really good at words. Thank you very much for your presentation and dialogue.
Well, as far as I understand, the question is about difference between, let's say, pre-modernistic classical museum and what we had in 20th century and this avant-garde museology. Yes, something like that. Yeah,
that's the way I understand it too.
Yeah, it's interesting issue because it was transformed, but gradually. So the first radical example of avant-garde museology would be from artistic field, would be Museum of Paint and Culture that appeared more or less the same age with the revolution or shortly after. But it was a kind of artisan space, but with support of government and the state. And they did almost the same thing that each artist does when get to this position. They try to promote their art as the most progressive, which was like that, fortunately, by that time. But in terms of display, they were very conservative. So the first expositions of this Museum of Painting Culture were almost the same with this pre-modernistic, display that is so-called St. Petersburg display with a layer of paintings. And only later in 20s, with Rodchenko, with other innovators, they became to the idea of giving more space to paintings, and it became more or less close to what we have now with more freely displayed things. And perhaps this vision influenced somehow Alfred Barr, who came to Moscow in 20s, and he was searching for new paintings and new way of exhibiting, but it was already time of productivists. So the most radical artists already gave up painting and did something else. But anyway, something he picked up from Moscow. And speaking about museums of revolutions, I guess this Museum of Painting Culture was the only, let's say, official museum of modern art in Soviet Union, because since then it was closed and introduced into Tretiakov's gallery, and then it was a story of socialistic realism, etc. And there was a very short period of time when there was a Marxist display, and Marxist display was close to what we have in case of conceptual installation and things related to institutional critique. So it's already, from something, from 60s, 70s, and even later. And it was curated exhibits, but
Arseny, sorry to interrupt you. Can you give an example of a Marxist display specifically, like an exhibition or a curator that practiced a kind of a Marxist display?
Yeah, I mentioned this Fyodorov Davidov.
Yeah,
and we have some text and images related on influx, and the most striking of it, it's like a wall where you may find the Black Square, Kandinsky, Klune, all together with text that we are having art in the dead end of I don't remember, bourgeois self-isolation, something like that. And so we have kind of super critical approach towards avant-garde, and usually critics from 20th century interpreted it in a very wrong way, because they compared it with fascist expositions of degenerative art, because in terms of display, degenerative art was very innovative, because they destroy this, neutral museological scientific approach with this intervention of text. But the goal was completely opposite, where fascists wanted to criticize modern art as a kind of degradation and something that we must varnish and return to golden age of, I don't know, pre-modernistic, archaic things. What Marxist museologists tried to do is to radicalize this critical impulses that explain that just Black Square is not enough now, because we must find another way for dealing with art, or even not with art. And Fyodorov Davidov wrote that Malevich opened possibility for design and for actual intervention into the real life. And so it was like, let's be more radical, let's be critical towards our previous critical approaches. This is different. And in terms of display, it was innovative, as I mentioned. And yeah, and I might finalize this answer with a link to Groys, who has very important for me distinction between artistic installation and curatorial installation. And he thinks that artistic installation, like total installation of Kabakov, for instance, is a territory of complete freedom, you know, absolutely autonomous and maybe totalitarian, yes, total totalitarian. Of course, this is not possible in our reality. Yeah. So in order to get this point, we must live in kind of another world with another structure of the society. But what a curatorial installation does is trying to mediate somehow this ultimate freedom of art into infrastructure of our reality, into ideological system, into architecture, into current consensus towards what is possible, what is not possible. That's why curatorial installations usually are more dangerous because artists, they are in ghettos, they are crazy, they you know, they do some weird things. But if museum or curator shows these things, it's already something more political. And I guess what we had in case of Marxist approaches and in case of all these examples of avant-garde museology, very interesting mix of these positions. So they were, I mean, these museologists, they were not artists, but they acted as artists. This is very interesting. And it was not like we do it, like I try to work like in a more laboratory mode, you know, let's imagine, let's make this imaginary experiments, like thought experiment, but they did it in reality. It is absolutely different. But of course, for them, it was more possible because at least in theory, they live in society free of all contradictions, of all social contradictions after revolution. So it was quite short period of time, but it was super, you know, progressive, innovative, because they thought that they live already in this another world. And I guess what is striking for me, and I guess it's possible to work with this, you know, gap in between curatorial and artistic in this political way, and imagine reframing of our world, reframing of our understanding of narratives and limits of our freedom and status of objects, etc., etc. So this is on display.
Well, thank you so much, Arseny, for giving us time and the talk and all of the ideas.
Thank you, Arseny.
Thank you, colleagues. Yeah.
To be continued. Next week, Sukhwan will actually speak about partly in response to the book that Arseny edited for us that I mentioned at the beginning, Avant-Garde Musiology. So that's on Thursday. Arseny, maybe you want to join because it's kind of interesting. I sent you the text that he wrote, yeah, and it's really quite brilliant. So maybe this could be an interesting encounter. Yeah,
I'm in general would love to participate in your lectures and join when it's possible, because
I think Sukhwan was here today for a little bit. I don't know. I think he may have left already, but I think
I saw him. Yes,
yeah,
I think I saw him. So I will send you, Arseny, the link for next Tuesday.
Okay, great. So thank you for invitation and listening and everything. So have a good day, evening.
Have a good evening. Yes.
Bye.